My parents banned me from Christmas dinner because I got a tattoo of a butterfly on my wrist, calling me marked by Satan. Then my sister sent me a photo of the empty chair with our church's 22-year-old youth pastor sitting in my place, feeding my mom grapes. I screenshot the photo and sent it to my dad, who was supposedly at a work emergency, and he replied, "Who the fuck is that?" Not knowing Mom had added me back to the family group chat where everyone could see his response. The notification sound went off 17 times in under 3 minutes. I sat on my apartment floor, phone buzzing like an angry wasp in my palm, watching the family group chat explode into accusations and deflections. My mother's typing indicator appeared and disappeared 4 times before she finally sent a prayer hands emoji. My sister Veronica sent 3 messages defending Mom, each one more desperate than the last, while my father's messages devolved into capital letters and threats to come home right now. I took another screenshot, backed up the entire chat to 3 different cloud services, and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a celebration. This qualified: 26 years of perfect church attendance, mission trips to Honduras, leading the youth choir, organizing bake sales. 26 years of being Pastor Hartwell's eldest daughter, the example for other girls, the one who would marry a good Christian man and raise godly children. All destroyed by a 1-inch butterfly I'd gotten during a spontaneous lunch break 3 weeks ago. My mother had discovered it when she grabbed my wrist to inspect my nails at Thanksgiving, recoiling like I'd burned her with a branding iron. She'd called an emergency family meeting where she and my father presented a 17-point PowerPoint about the sanctity of the body as God's temple. Veronica had nodded along, smug and superior, her engagement ring to the church's associate pastor gleaming under the dining room chandelier. When I'd refused to have it removed or covered, my mother's face had transformed into something I'd never seen before: pure, cold disgust. Dad had simply pointed to the door. The texts kept coming. Veronica was demanding I apologize publicly. My father was ordering everyone to call him immediately. My mother's sisters were weighing in with Bible verses. But I noticed something nobody else had caught yet. The metadata on the photo my sister had sent showed it was taken at 6:47 p.m. Dad's work emergency text to the family chat had been sent at 6:15 p.m., explaining he'd be late. The Christmas dinner was scheduled for 6 p.m., which meant the youth pastor had been sitting in my chair, being hand-fed grapes by my mother, while my father was still supposedly at the office. I zoomed in on the photo, studying the background. There was Dad's favorite recliner, empty. His reading glasses on the side table. His Bible with the cracked leather cover sitting unopened. And in the reflection of the china cabinet glass behind my mother's head, I could see something that made my wine glass pause halfway to my lips. The photo frames that usually displayed our family portraits had been turned face down. My phone started ringing. Dad. I let it go to voicemail, then played it on speaker. His voice was shaking with barely controlled rage, demanding to know why I was stirring up trouble and trying to destroy this family. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He called 4 more times in rapid succession. I blocked his number and started scrolling through my photo gallery, looking for something I'd almost forgotten about. Back in July, when I'd stopped by the house to drop off Mom's birthday cake, I'd borrowed her iPad to look up a recipe. A notification had popped up, a calendar invite for prayer session with Pastor Joel every Wednesday at 2 p.m. for the past 4 months. I'd thought it was church business. Now I pulled up my own calendar and cross-referenced the dates. Every single Wednesday that Mom had her prayer sessions, Dad's work calendar showed him in the office until 7 p.m. Pastor Joel Thornton, 22 years old, fresh out of Bible college, all dimples and carefully styled hair. He'd joined our church 8 months ago, and my mother had immediately volunteered to mentor him, help him adjust to small-town ministry, guide him spiritually. My father had encouraged it, proud of his wife's dedication to the church. Veronica had gushed about how wonderful it was that Mom was so giving with her time. I'd been too busy with my marketing job and my secret tattoo appointments to pay much attention. I opened my laptop and started searching. Social media is a beautiful thing when you know what to look for. Pastor Joel's Instagram was a carefully curated collection of Bible verses and sunset photos, but his tagged photos told a different story. There was Mom at the church picnic in June, her hand resting on his shoulder just a beat too long. Mom and Joel at the community prayer breakfast in August, sitting beside each other while Dad sat 3 seats away. A photo from Veronica's engagement party where Mom and Joel were caught mid-laugh in the background, leaning toward each other like they shared a delicious secret. Each photo had dozens of likes from our church congregation, everyone completely oblivious to what was happening right in front of them. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Michelle, who'd always been more sister to me than Veronica ever was. "Your mom just posted on Facebook that she's praying for your soul and asking for the church to support her during this difficult time. The comments are wild." I pulled up Facebook and there it was, my mother's post, dripping with martyrdom, painting herself as the suffering parent of a rebellious daughter. 237 comments in 40 minutes, most of them offering prayers and support. Mrs. Henderson from the church council had written, "We're behind you, Patricia, standing firm against the world's corruption." I screenshot that too, adding it to my growing collection. The wine bottle was half empty when my apartment buzzer rang. I checked the camera, Veronica, dressed in her church Christmas best, finger jabbing the button repeatedly. I didn't buzz her up. She started calling, and when I didn't answer, she began texting. "Mel, we need to talk. You're tearing this family apart. Dad is furious and Mom is crying. That photo was a joke and you know it. How could you embarrass us like this?" I replied with a single message. "Was it also a joke when you told everyone at church that I was living in sin with my boyfriend?" Veronica and I both knew I didn't have a boyfriend. I'd overheard her spreading that lie at the church potluck 2 months ago, trying to explain my absence from Sunday services without admitting I'd simply stopped believing in their version of God. She stopped texting. The buzzer went silent. I poured another glass of wine and opened my email, composing a message to someone I'd been meaning to contact for weeks. Margaret Walsh, investigative reporter for the local newspaper, had done a series last year on financial mismanagement in religious organizations. I'd read every article. Now I typed carefully, attaching screenshots and asking if she'd be interested in a story about a church's youth pastor and a certain prominent deacon's wife. I hesitated only a moment before hitting send. My phone rang again, this time an unknown number. I answered out of curiosity. "Miss Hartwell?" A woman's voice, professional and crisp. "This is Detective Sarah Morrison with the County Sheriff's Office. I'm calling regarding a complaint filed against you for harassment and defamation by a Patricia Hartwell. Are you available to come to the station to discuss this matter?" I almost laughed. Of course my mother had gone to the police. It was so perfectly her. Cry persecution while actively trying to destroy her daughter's reputation. "Detective Morrison," I said calmly, "I'd be happy to come in, but I should inform you that I have extensive documentation of what actually occurred tonight, including screenshots, metadata, and a timeline of events. I also have evidence of a pattern of behavior by Mrs. Hartwell that might interest you." There was a pause. What kind of pattern? The kind that involves a married woman and a much younger man who holds a position of authority over teenagers at a church. Another pause, longer this time. "Miss Hartwell, why don't you come in tomorrow morning at 9 and bring everything you have?" I agreed and ended the call, feeling something shift in my chest. Not quite victory yet, but the possibility of it. The church my parents had built their entire lives around, the reputation they'd cultivated for 30 years, the pristine image of the perfect Christian family. All of it was built on a foundation I was about to crack wide open. And the most beautiful part? They'd handed me the sledgehammer themselves when they chose a tattoo as the hill to die on. The family group chat had gone quiet, which meant they were either regrouping or fighting in person. I checked the church's website and found what I was looking for: the Board of Elders meeting schedule. They met every first Monday of the month. Today was December 23rd. Their next meeting was January 6th. I had exactly 2 weeks to build my case, gather my evidence, and prepare for the kind of reckoning my family had never imagined possible. They thought banning me from Christmas dinner was punishment. They had no idea I'd just been given the greatest gift of all: freedom from having to protect their secrets anymore. I raised my wine glass to the empty apartment, to the butterfly on my wrist, to the daughter they'd discarded without realizing she'd been paying attention all along. "Merry Christmas to me," I whispered, and took another screenshot as my mother posted her third prayer request of the evening. The detective's office smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. I sat across from Detective Morrison the next morning with my laptop, 3 USB drives, and a printed timeline that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing as I walked her through 8 months of carefully documented evidence I hadn't even realized I'd been collecting. Your mother scheduled 43 prayer sessions with Pastor Thornton since April, I said, pulling up the calendar screenshots. Every Wednesday at 2 p.m. My father's work calendar shows him in the office until 7 on those same days. But here's what's interesting. I pulled the church's security log. I slid a printed spreadsheet across her desk. My old youth group friend Danny worked as the church's IT administrator, and he'd been more than happy to help after I explained what I suspected. Pastor Thornton's key card shows him entering the building at 1:30 on Wednesdays. But he doesn't go to his office. He accesses the west entrance, which leads directly to the senior pastor's private study. My father's study, the one with the leather couch and the door that locks from the inside. Detective Morrison's eyebrow rose slightly. And your father? Dad's key card shows him leaving the building at noon every Wednesday, then returning around 7 p.m. Except his work calendar claims he's in meetings all afternoon. I pulled up another document. I called his office yesterday, pretending to be a potential client. His secretary said he has a standing appointment out of the office every Wednesday afternoon and doesn't tell anyone where he goes. The detective made a note. That's not necessarily evidence of anything criminal, Miss Hartwell. No, but this might be. I opened a folder of bank statements I'd found while cleaning out my old room 2 months ago. Mom had asked me to shred old financial documents, and I'd discovered something odd before feeding them into the machine. My mother wrote 6 checks to mentorship program between May and November, totaling $12,000. The church doesn't have a mentorship program, but Pastor Thornton bought a new car in June, paid in cash according to the DMV records I pulled. Danny had also helped me access public records. God bless small-town databases with loose security. And he moved from his apartment into a rental house in August. The landlord's wife goes to our church. She told my cousin Michelle that a generous church member paid 6 months' rent up front as a blessing for their young pastor. Detective Morrison leaned back in her chair. You've been busy. I had a lot of time on Christmas Eve. I opened another file. But here's what really matters. Pastor Thornton leads the youth group. 53 teenagers between 13 and 18 attend regularly. Last month, 3 families quietly left the church. I reached out to them. I'd spent hours the previous night tracking them down through Facebook. 2 of the mothers told me they'd felt uncomfortable with how much time Pastor Thornton spent alone with their daughters, particularly during counseling sessions. They said when they brought their concerns to the church board, they were told they were being paranoid and judgmental. My father is the head of that board. The detective's expression shifted. Do you have those conversations documented? I pulled up my phone and played the recording. I'd asked permission before recording, explaining that I wanted to help other families. Both mothers had agreed, their voices tight with barely suppressed anger as they described their daughters coming home from youth group later than scheduled, finding text messages from Pastor Thornton on their phones at inappropriate hours, noticing how he'd touch their shoulders or lean in close during conversations. Nothing overtly illegal, but enough to make them pull their children from the church entirely. When they'd tried to warn other parents, my mother had publicly accused them of spreading gossip and trying to destroy a good man's reputation. The congregation had shunned them. They'd eventually moved their memberships to churches in neighboring towns. Jesus, Detective Morrison muttered. And your father knew about these complaints? He dismissed them in a board meeting. I have the minutes. Danny had come through again. Dad said the families were being influenced by secular culture and attacking traditional pastoral care. My mother stood beside him during the announcement, holding Pastor Thornton's hand and calling him a blessing to our community. I paused, letting that image sink in front of the entire congregation. The detective was typing rapidly now. I need to make some calls. Can you leave these files with me? I handed her the USB drives. I have copies of everything. And detective? One more thing. I pulled up a photo on my phone, the one my sister had sent, showing Pastor Thornton feeding grapes to my mother. This was taken at my parents' house during Christmas dinner, the same dinner I was banned from because of a tattoo. My father wasn't home yet. Pastor Thornton was sitting in my chair, in my father's house, being hand-fed by my father's wife while my father's younger daughter took photos and thought it was cute. Detective Morrison studied the image. How old is your sister? 23. Engaged to the associate pastor. I watched her process that information. The same associate pastor who's been covering Pastor Thornton's youth group sessions for the past month because Thornton has been overwhelmed with pastoral duties. Want to guess what those duties involve? She closed her laptop. Miss Hartwell, I'm going to need you to not discuss this with anyone while we investigate. Can you do that? Absolutely. I stood, slinging my bag over my shoulder. Though I should mention, I sent all of this to Margaret Walsh at the newspaper last night. She's very interested in doing a story about pastoral accountability and financial transparency in religious organizations. Her editor approved it this morning. The detective's eyes widened. Miss Hartwell, my family tried to destroy my reputation over a butterfly tattoo. They called me marked by Satan, banned me from their home, and encouraged hundreds of people to pray for my corrupted soul. All while covering up credible concerns about a youth pastor's behavior and my mother's inappropriate relationship with a man young enough to be her son. I smiled, and it felt sharp as broken glass. I'm just making sure the truth comes out. Isn't that what they always taught me? The truth shall set you free? I left her office and walked into the bright December morning, my phone already buzzing with notifications. Margaret Walsh wanted to meet for coffee. Danny had sent me another file, Pastor Thornton's search history from the church computer, which included multiple lookups for age of consent in this state and can a pastor date a church member? And my cousin Michelle had forwarded me a screenshot from the church's private Facebook group, where my mother had posted a tearful video asking for prayers because her daughter was spreading vicious lies to destroy their family. The video had 63 comments, most of them supportive, but 5 were different. 5 parents asking questions. What lies specifically? Why would Melanie do this? Has anyone else noticed anything concerning about the youth program? I screenshot those comments and sent them to Detective Morrison with a simple message. It's starting. My phone rang. Veronica. I answered on speaker while waiting at a red light. You absolute bitch, she hissed without preamble. Dad had to hire a lawyer. Mom hasn't stopped crying. Pastor Joel might lose his position. All because you couldn't handle being called out for your sin. Is that what we're calling it? I asked pleasantly. Interesting. Hey, Veronica, quick question. Did you know Mom gave Pastor Joel $12,000 this year? Or that he texts her at 11 p.m. most nights? Or that 3 families left the church because he made their teenage daughters uncomfortable? Silence. Then, you're lying. I have bank statements, phone records, and recorded interviews. Margaret Walsh from the newspaper has them too. Her article runs Monday. The light turned green. But you're right. This is all about my tattoo. That 1-inch butterfly is definitely the real scandal here. You're going to destroy everything Dad built. Dad built it on other people's blind faith and Mom's performance of perfection. I'm just turning on the lights so everyone can see what's actually been happening. A notification popped up. The church secretary had just posted in the staff group chat that an emergency board meeting had been called for tomorrow morning. Danny was still sharing information. Tell me, Veronica, does your fiancé know you've been covering for Pastor Thornton? That you've been dismissing parents' concerns and calling them judgmental? Because I have screenshots of those conversations too, from the youth leader group chat, the one you thought was private. Her breath caught. Mel, you sent me that photo to hurt me, to show me I'd been replaced, that I didn't matter, that my family moved on without me. You wanted me to feel small and excluded and ashamed. I pulled into the coffee shop parking lot where Margaret was waiting. Congratulations, you gave me exactly the motivation I needed to stop protecting all of you. Merry Christmas, sister. I hung up and blocked her number, then sat in my car for a moment, watching my reflection in the rearview mirror. The butterfly on my wrist caught the sunlight, its wings seeming to shimmer with movement. My mother had called it a mark of Satan, but Satan was the one who questioned authority, who demanded truth over blind obedience, who refused to bow to unjust power. Maybe she'd been right about the mark, just wrong about what it meant. Margaret Walsh was waiting inside with 2 coffees and a recording device. She stood when she saw me, extending her hand with a smile that promised consequences. Miss Hartwell, Thank you for meeting me. I have so many questions. I shook her hand firmly, noting her press credentials clipped to her bag, the notebook already filled with preliminary research. I have all the answers. And Margaret, call me Melanie. We're going to be spending a lot of time together over the next few weeks. She grinned. I like you already. My editor wants this as a 3-part series. We're thinking faith, finance, and failure of oversight as the title. What do you think? I thought about my mother's tearful Facebook video, my father's frantic lawyer calls, my sister's desperate deflection. I thought about the 5 parents starting to ask questions, the families who'd been silenced and shamed, the teenage girls who'd felt uncomfortable but didn't know how to articulate why. I thought about Pastor Joel Thornton sitting in my chair, being fed grapes like a Roman emperor, never imagining that the daughter they'd discarded would be the one to bring their temple crashing down. I think it's perfect, I said, and opened my laptop. Let's start with the money. The article dropped at 6 a.m. on Monday, and my phone started ringing before I'd finished my first coffee. I'd silenced notifications from everyone except Margaret, Danny, and Detective Morrison, so I watched the chaos unfold through strategic check-ins rather than constant bombardment. Margaret's 3-part series was devastatingly thorough. Part 1 focused on the financial irregularities, my mother's checks to the non-existent mentorship program, the mysterious cash purchase of Pastor Thornton's car, the rental house paid for by anonymous church funds. She'd interviewed the landlord, who confirmed that Patricia Hartwell had written the check personally, claiming it was from a church benevolence fund. The church's treasurer, when contacted, stated no such fund existed and no benevolence payments had been authorized by the board. By 7 a.m., the church's main phone line had been disconnected due to call volume. By 8, my father had posted a statement on the church website calling the article "Malicious Lies from a Disgruntled Former Member with an Axe to Grind." By 9, Margaret's editor had released the financial documents as supplementary material, and 3 board members had resigned. I screenshot everything, backing it up compulsively, watching my family's empire develop cracks that spread like lightning across glass. Detective Morrison called at 10. We're executing a search warrant at the church this afternoon. Pastor Thornton's phone records show extensive communication with your mother, but also with 4 teenage girls in the youth group. Their parents have been contacted. Her voice was carefully neutral. You should know, your father showed up at the station this morning, demanding we arrest you for defamation and harassment. When we told him we were investigating his church instead, he tried to call the sheriff directly. They've been golfing buddies for 15 years. Tried? I caught the past tense. The sheriff recused himself from the case an hour ago. Turns out his daughter was one of the girls who felt uncomfortable around Pastor Thornton. She never told him why she quit youth group last spring. She told him this morning. The detective paused. He's not taking it well. Your father no longer has friends in the department. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt something colder. The grim satisfaction of watching dominoes fall exactly as planned. What happens next? We interview the girls, examine the church's financial records, and build a case if warranted. The state's attorney is already involved because of the potential misuse of nonprofit funds. This is bigger than your family now, Melanie. A lot bigger. She hesitated. Are you safe? Your father seems volatile. He doesn't know where I live. I'd moved apartments 3 months ago and never updated my address with them. Just another small rebellion they'd dismissed as typical millennial irresponsibility. But thank you for asking. After we hung up, I finally checked the family group chat. 273 unread messages. I scrolled through them in fascination, watching my family's desperation escalate from anger to panic to frantic damage control. My father demanding I recant everything. My mother's rambling, barely coherent messages about forgiveness and family loyalty. Veronica's increasingly unhinged accusations. My aunts and uncles trying to mediate, then taking sides, then turning on each other as more information emerged. At message 147, my Uncle Robert, Dad's younger brother, sent a bombshell. I told you 3 years ago something was wrong with Patricia's mentoring. You called me jealous and bitter. Guess who was right? The family group chat exploded. Apparently, Uncle Robert had noticed my mother's behavior with a previous youth pastor, a man who'd left the church suddenly after only 6 months. Dad had dismissed Robert's concerns as misinterpretation. Now, Robert was posting screenshots of that old conversation, receipts of money he'd noticed missing from church accounts, observations about Mom's pattern of targeting young male staff members. My father's siblings were turning on him. Aunts I'd never seen disagree about anything were calling my mother a predator, and Veronica was desperately trying to defend them, while her fiancé, the associate pastor, maintained conspicuous silence. I screenshot the entire conversation and sent it to Margaret with a note. Part 4? She responded immediately. Already writing it. This keeps getting better. My coffee had gone cold when Danny called. Mel, you need to see this. He sent me a link to the church's internal server, a folder I shouldn't have had access to. I'm burning my bridges anyway. Might as well burn them completely. Look at the personnel files. I opened the folder and found myself staring at HR records going back 12 years. 5 youth pastors had served at the church during that time. 3 had left abruptly with severance packages and non-disclosure agreements signed by my father as head pastor. The NDAs specifically mentioned allegations of inappropriate conduct and mutual agreement to part ways without public discussion. But the conduct being silenced wasn't the youth pastors. It was my mother's. Each file contained incident reports from staff members, congregation complaints, even a letter from one youth pastor's wife begging the board to address Patricia Hartwell's obsessive attention toward her husband. Every single complaint had been dismissed, buried, or resolved with money and silence. Danny, this is evidence of systemic cover-up? Yeah. His voice was tight. My little sister is in that youth group, Mel. She's 15. I've been watching Thornton's behavior for months, but couldn't prove anything because everyone kept saying I was overreacting. Your mom publicly defended him every single time someone raised concerns, called the worried parents divisive and influenced by Satan, and my parents believed her because Pastor Hartwell wouldn't let his wife lie, right? He laughed bitterly. I copied everything before the board could delete it. It's already with Detective Morrison and Margaret Walsh. I'll probably get sued, but I don't care anymore. You're a good brother, Danny. I'm an angry brother. There's a difference. He paused. For what it's worth, that tattoo looks great. I saw the photo Veronica was passing around church, trying to show how you'd fallen from grace. Pretty sure she didn't expect people to zoom in and realize it's just a butterfly, not some demonic symbol. I had to laugh. She always did lack imagination. By noon, the church had canceled all services indefinitely. By 1 p.m., Pastor Thornton had hired a criminal defense attorney. By 2, my mother had been admitted to the hospital for nervous exhaustion, which I translated as avoiding questions. My father posted another statement, this one claiming they were victims of a coordinated attack by anti-Christian media. The comments section filled with former church members sharing their own stories of dismissed concerns, ignored complaints, and families pressured into silence. Margaret was documenting everything for part 2 of her series. My cousin Michelle showed up at my apartment that evening with Thai food and wine. Your mom's hospital room has been getting flower deliveries all day, she announced, unpacking containers. But here's the thing. Half of them have notes like praying for the truth to emerge and God sees everything. They're not supportive. They're threatening. She pulled up photos on her phone. Look at this one. The truth shall set you free, Patricia. Confess. I studied the images, noting the passive-aggressive prayer language, the thinly veiled accusations disguised as concern. The church is turning on her. The church is terrified. If the board knew about this pattern and covered it up, they're liable. If they didn't know, they're incompetent. Either way, people are pulling their kids from programs, withholding tithes, and demanding answers. Michelle took a long drink of wine. Your dad's trying to position this as persecution, but it's not working. Too much evidence. Too many witnesses coming forward now that they realize they weren't alone in their concerns. My phone buzzed with an email from Margaret. Part 2 of the series was scheduled for Wednesday, focusing on the pattern of behavior and institutional failure. She'd interviewed 7 families who'd left the church over the past decade, all of them describing similar concerns that had been dismissed or punished. The article would include copies of the NDAs, the incident reports Danny had provided, and expert commentary from psychologists about grooming behavior and institutional protection of predators. It was going to be nuclear. How are you doing with all this? Michelle asked, studying my face. Seriously, you just blew up your entire family. They blew themselves up, I corrected. I just documented the explosion. But her question lingered after she left, after I'd cleaned up the takeout containers and poured myself one more glass of wine. How was I doing? I examined the butterfly on my wrist, remembering my mother's revulsion, my father's disappointment, Veronica's smug superiority as she'd informed me I was no longer welcome at family events. They'd cast me out over a 1-inch tattoo while harboring secrets that destroyed families and silenced victims. They'd chosen their reputation over truth, their image over integrity, their comfort over the safety of children. I was doing fine. Better than fine, actually. For the first time in 26 years, I wasn't carrying the weight of their expectations, wasn't performing the role of perfect daughter, wasn't pretending their version of faith made sense. The butterfly had been more symbolic than I'd realized when I'd gotten it. Transformation, freedom, the emergence of something new from something that had died. My old life, my old family, the old Melanie who'd swallowed her doubts and smiled through their hypocrisy. She'd been suffocating inside a cocoon of their making. The tattoo had just been the first crack. My phone lit up with a text from Detective Morrison. 4 more families came forward today. We have enough for charges. Thank you for your courage. I screenshot that too, adding it to my collection, then opened a new document on my laptop. Margaret wanted my personal story for part 3 of the series, not just the facts, but the emotional journey of watching my family crumble under the weight of their own deception. She wanted to know what it felt like to be the whistleblower, the outcast, the marked daughter who'd refused to stay silent. I started typing, my fingers flying across the keyboard as months of suppressed truth poured out. I wrote about the cognitive dissonance of growing up in a church that preached love while practicing exclusion, that claimed moral authority while covering up abuse, that demanded perfection from its members while its leaders wallowed in hypocrisy. I wrote about the casual cruelty of my mother's judgment, the way she'd wielded her position as pastor's wife like a weapon against anyone who threatened her control. I wrote about my father's willful blindness, his desperate need to believe his wife incapable of wrongdoing, even when evidence mounted like stones at his feet. I wrote about Veronica's complicity, the way she'd learned to wield judgment just like our mother, perpetuating cycles of harm in the name of righteousness. And I wrote about freedom, the strange, terrifying, exhilarating freedom of having nothing left to lose. When they'd banned me from Christmas dinner, they'd thought they were punishing me. Instead, they'd released me from the last threads of obligation to protect them. Every revelation, every exposed secret, every piece of evidence I'd handed to investigators and journalists. It wasn't revenge so much as liberation. Theirs and mine. They'd never be free of their lies until someone forced the truth into daylight. I'd just been the one willing to flip the switch. I finished writing at 2 a.m. and sent the document to Margaret with a subject line that made me smile. From the marked daughter. Then I crawled into bed, my phone finally silent, and slept better than I had in months. Tomorrow would bring more chaos, more accusations, more desperate attempts at damage control. But tonight, I could rest in the certainty that I'd done exactly what they'd trained me to do my entire life. I'd told the truth. They'd just never expected the truth to be about them. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning, but I knew about it by Wednesday night. Danny sent me the agenda. Discussion and potential removal of senior pastor Robert Hartwell pending investigation outcomes. My father was being forced out of the church he'd built, and the board was moving fast to distance themselves from the expanding scandal. Margaret's second article had landed like a bomb, and the denomination headquarters had opened its own investigation. Insurance companies were getting involved. Lawyers were circling. The church that had been the center of my family's universe was imploding in real time. I wasn't supposed to know about the meeting, wasn't supposed to be anywhere near church property, but Danny had other ideas. "I can get you into the AV booth," he texted. "You won't be seen, but you'll hear everything. The meeting's being recorded per bylaws. Thought you might want to witness history." I arrived at the church at 5 a.m., while the parking lot was still empty and the building dark. Danny met me at the side entrance, looking exhausted but grimly satisfied. "They've been having emergency sessions all week," he explained, leading me through familiar hallways that felt foreign now. "The youth ministry is shut down completely. Pastor Thornton's been placed on administrative leave, which is church speak for, we're waiting for the police to arrest him. 3 more board members quit yesterday. The denomination is sending investigators tomorrow. And your dad has been trying to rally support, calling this a spiritual attack. Is it working? I followed him up the stairs to the balcony level, where the AV booth overlooked the main sanctuary. Not even a little. Half the congregation has stopped attending. Tithes are down 70%. People are asking for refunds on their pledges, claiming they were defrauded if their money went to covering up abuse. Danny unlocked the booth and gestured me inside. Your family's name is poison now. Even the loyalists are distancing themselves. The booth was cramped but functional, with windows overlooking the sanctuary and the large conference room where board meetings happened. Danny adjusted the audio feeds, and I could hear the empty building settling, the hum of HVAC, the distant sound of cars arriving. I'm quitting after this, he said quietly. Got a job offer in Seattle. My parents are furious, but they're still defending your father, so I think that tells you everything about whether I should listen to them. I'm sorry you're losing your family over this. He shook his head. I'm losing people who chose comfort over protecting kids. That's not family, that's just shared DNA. He checked his watch. They'll start arriving soon. I'll be downstairs running audio like normal. Nobody knows you're here except me, and I'll deny it if asked. There's water in the mini fridge and the bathroom is down the hall. Don't leave this booth until the building is empty. After he left, I settled into the uncomfortable chair and watched the parking lot fill with cars. Board members arrived in clusters, their body language tense. Some of the church elders looked devastated, others angry. My father's car pulled in at exactly 7:55, 5 minutes before the meeting start. He emerged looking 10 years older than he had at Thanksgiving, his shoulders hunched, his normally perfect hair disheveled. My mother wasn't with him. She was still in the hospital, claiming her blood pressure was dangerously high, conveniently unavailable for questioning. The board members filed into the conference room and Danny switched on the recording system. Through the AV feed, I could hear every word in crystal clarity. The board chairman, Douglas Fletcher, a retired attorney who'd been with the church since its founding, called the meeting to order with barely suppressed fury in his voice. Gentlemen and ladies, we're here to address the catastrophic failure of leadership that has brought this church to the brink of destruction. No prayer, no Bible reading, no pretense of spiritual guidance, just legal CYA and damage control. Pastor Hartwell, you've been given an opportunity to address the board before we vote on your termination. You have 15 minutes. My father stood, and I leaned closer to the window, watching him grip the back of his chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Brothers and sisters in Christ, what we're experiencing is a coordinated attack from the enemy. Satan has used my own daughter to— Stop! Douglas cut him off sharply. We're not doing the spiritual warfare speech. We're here to discuss documented evidence of financial misappropriation, failure to report suspected abuse, and the systematic silencing of legitimate concerns from congregation members. The denomination's attorneys have reviewed the files. You and Patricia are facing potential criminal charges. This church is facing multiple lawsuits. Your daughter didn't create this situation. She just exposed it. The room fell silent. I watched my father's face cycle through shock, anger, and finally something that might have been fear. My wife has done nothing wrong. She was mentoring a young pastor. Your wife gave $12,000 to Joel Thornton without board approval or documentation. Another board member spoke up, a woman named Ruth Sterling who'd always been kind to me. She paid his rent, bought him a car, and spent an average of 6 hours per week alone with him in your private study. When parents complained about his behavior with their daughters, she publicly attacked their character. That's not mentoring, Robert. That's something else entirely. You're allowing yourself to be deceived by— We have the incident reports. Douglas slid a folder across the table. 5 different youth pastors over 12 years. 5 sets of complaints about Patricia's inappropriate behavior. 5 NDAs that you signed using church funds to silence people. The pattern is undeniable. You knew, Robert. You knew, and you covered it up because acknowledging the truth would damage your reputation. I watched my father open the folder, his hands shaking as he read documents he'd probably hoped were destroyed. His face went from red to white to gray. This is out of context. Patricia struggles with boundaries, but she would never. Investigators found text messages between your wife and Joel Thornton that are extremely inappropriate. Ruth's voice was gentle but firm. Messages sent at midnight, discussing his personal struggles, his relationships, his body image. Messages where she calls him my special blessing and talks about how much she needs him. Robert, you have to see this for what it is. She's sick, my father whispered, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. She's in the hospital right now because the stress of being exposed. Douglas stood. Robert, I've known you for 30 years. I helped you build this church. But I cannot and will not protect you or Patricia from the consequences of your actions. The board has voted. You're terminated as senior pastor effective immediately. You have until Monday to clear out your office. Your severance is contingent on your cooperation with investigators and your agreement not to disparage the church publicly. My father slumped into his chair. You're making a mistake. The congregation will never accept this. The congregation is fleeing in droves. We've lost 40% of our members in 3 days. The people who remain are demanding accountability, not loyalty to you. Douglas gathered his papers. I'm sorry it came to this, but you chose your wife's reputation over the safety of children in your care. That's unforgivable. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing legal strategies, insurance claims, and crisis management. My father sat silent through all of it, a broken man watching his life's work disintegrate. When they finally dismissed him, he shuffled out like someone decades older, not even arguing when they asked for his keys and access cards. I stayed in the booth long after the building emptied, watching the sanctuary lights dim, the parking lot clear. My phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. Part 3 runs tomorrow. Your personal essay is powerful. Prepare for backlash. I didn't respond. Instead, I sat in the darkness, thinking about the man I'd just watched destroyed. My father had chosen this. Every time he'd dismissed a complaint, signed an NDA, defended my mother's inappropriate behavior, he'd been choosing his own comfort over truth. Every time he'd preached about integrity while practicing deception, he'd been building his own gallows. And when I'd gotten a simple tattoo, a symbol of transformation and freedom, he'd chosen to see it as defiance worthy of exile, rather than examining why his daughter might need to transform, what she might need freedom from. They'd cast me out, thinking I was the problem, never realizing I was the solution walking away before I became complicit in their corruption. The butterfly on my wrist seemed to pulse in the dim light, a permanent reminder that sometimes you have to destroy the cocoon completely before you can fly. I left the church through the same side door I'd entered, stepping into a cold December night that felt like spring. Tomorrow, Margaret's final article would publish with my name attached, my story told in my own words. My family would have to confront not just their exposed secrets, but my public testimony about growing up in their dysfunction. Veronica would see herself described as complicit. My mother would read about her daughter's slow realization that maternal love shouldn't feel like performance review. My father would face his daughter's assessment that he'd valued reputation over relationship at every critical juncture. They would be devastated. They would feel betrayed. They would claim I'd twisted the truth, that I was vindictive and cruel, that I'd destroyed them for petty revenge over a tattoo, and none of it would matter because the truth doesn't require their approval to be true. I drove home through empty streets, my phone mercifully silent, and fell asleep planning what I'd wear to the inevitable confrontation. Something with short sleeves, I decided. The butterfly would be visible. Margaret's final article hit the internet at 6 a.m. Friday morning, and this time I was ready. I'd taken the day off work, stocked my apartment with enough food to survive a siege, and silenced every notification except messages from Margaret, Detective Morrison, and Danny. The essay ran under the headline, The Pastor's Daughter, One Woman's Journey from Obedience to Accountability, and it pulled no punches. I'd written about the cognitive dissonance of growing up watching my mother flirt with youth pastors while preaching modesty to teenage girls. I'd described my father's willful blindness, the way he'd twisted every concern into an attack on his family rather than a call to address real problems. I'd named the pattern predatory behavior enabled by institutional power, victims silenced by spiritual authority, families destroyed while church leaders protected their image. And I'd explained exactly how a 1-inch butterfly tattoo had become the catalyst for exposing decades of corruption. Not because the tattoo mattered, but because their reaction to it revealed how little they cared about anything except control. The article went viral within hours. By noon, it had been shared 40,000 times. By evening, national news outlets were picking it up. The comments section became a confessional. Hundreds of people sharing their own stories of religious trauma, pastoral abuse, and families who'd chosen reputation over truth. My inbox filled with messages from strangers thanking me for my courage, from journalists requesting interviews, from advocacy organizations offering support, and from my family, complete radio silence. Until Saturday morning, when Detective Morrison called with news that made everything worthwhile. Joel Thornton was arrested an hour ago. We have enough evidence for multiple charges: sexual misconduct with a minor, misuse of position of authority, and financial fraud. 2 of the girls in the youth group disclosed inappropriate relationships. He'd been grooming them for months, using the same tactics your mother taught him. She paused. Patricia is being charged as an accessory. We have text messages where she advised him on how to gain the girls' trust, how to isolate them from their parents, how to frame concerns as attacks from Satan. She was actively helping him. I sat down hard on my couch, the room spinning slightly. She was coaching him? She'd done this before, Melanie, with previous youth pastors. We found her journals in the church office, years of entries about her special connections with young staff members, her frustration when they'd get married or leave, her detailed observations about their physical appearances and emotional vulnerabilities. It's textbook predatory behavior, except she was also enabling Thornton's access to minors. The district attorney is pursuing serious charges. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time, processing the magnitude of what my mother had become. Not just an inappropriate flirt or boundary-challenged mentor, but an active predator who'd weaponized her position to groom both young staff members and enable abuse of children. Every time someone had raised concerns, she'd been protecting not just her behavior, but a pattern of abuse she'd been facilitating for years. My phone rang again, this time Veronica, calling from a number I hadn't blocked yet. I answered on speaker, morbidly curious what she'd say now. Are you happy? Her voice was raw, broken. Mom's been arrested. Dad's been terminated. The church is closing permanently. They can't survive the lawsuits. My wedding is canceled because Jason's career is destroyed by association. Our entire family is ruined, and it's all because you couldn't forgive Mom for worrying about your soul. Is that really what you think this is about? I kept my voice level, almost curious. Veronica. Our mother was helping a youth pastor sexually abuse teenage girls. She kept detailed journals about her obsessions with young men. She spent years covering up credible abuse allegations, and you helped her do it by dismissing every concern as gossip and judgment. She made mistakes. She committed crimes, plural, over decades, and Dad enabled every single one because his reputation mattered more than the truth. I stood and walked to my window, looking out at the city spread below. You know what the real kicker is? If they'd just accepted my tattoo, if they'd been even slightly tolerant of something that didn't match their perfect image, I would have kept protecting them. I would have stayed quiet about my doubts, ignored the red flags, convinced myself I was being judgmental. But they chose a butterfly as their hill to die on, and that told me everything I needed to know about their priorities. So this is revenge. No. This is consequences. Revenge would be me making false accusations. I just documented what was already happening and made sure the right people saw it. Your family destroyed yourselves. I just refuse to help you hide the evidence anymore. Veronica made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. Jason broke off our engagement, said he can't be associated with our family. His parents won't even speak to me. I'm being fired from the church administrative position because of the scandal. I have nothing left, Mel. Nothing. You have a chance to be honest for the first time in your life, I said quietly. You have an opportunity to stop performing and start dealing with reality. You have freedom if you're brave enough to take it, but that's going to require admitting you were wrong, that you hurt people, that you chose your parents' approval over the safety of children, and I don't think you're ready for that yet." She hung up without another word. I blocked the number and returned to my computer, where I'd been drafting something I'd thought about for days. An open letter to the church, to be published on my social media and sent to local news outlets. Margaret had advised against it. "You've won, Melanie, don't risk overplaying your hand." But this wasn't about winning. This was about making sure the lesson landed. I titled it, "To the Congregation That Chose Comfort Over Truth," and began typing. "For 26 years, I watched you praise my family's image while ignoring their reality. You celebrated my father's leadership while dismissing the families who tried to warn you. You admired my mother's dedication while attacking anyone who questioned her behavior. You rewarded performance and punished honesty, creating an environment where predators could thrive as long as they said the right prayers and attended the right number of services. When I got a tattoo, you called me marked by Satan and celebrated my exile. When teenage girls said they felt uncomfortable with your youth pastor, you called them worldly and divisive. When families left because their concerns were dismissed, you gossiped about their lack of faith. You got your priorities exactly backwards, and now you're reaping what you sowed. I don't forgive you. I don't forgive my parents. I don't forgive my sister. Forgiveness requires repentance, and none of you have shown any evidence of actually changing your minds about what matters. You're just sorry you got caught, sorry the evidence was undeniable, sorry your comfortable delusions were shattered by inconvenient facts. But I do hope you learn. I hope you learn that reputation without integrity is just well-maintained lies. I hope you learn that spiritual authority without accountability is just sanctified abuse. I hope you learn that love without truth is just manipulation. And I hope you learn that the person asking uncomfortable questions isn't your enemy. They're often the only one brave enough to tell you the truth. My butterfly tattoo didn't mark me with Satan. It marked me with freedom. Freedom to question, freedom to leave, freedom to stop protecting people who were hurting others. If that's satanic, then I guess you were right about me all along. I'm not sorry for what I did. I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner. Sincerely, the pastor's daughter. I published it at 3 p.m. and watched it spread like wildfire. Within an hour, it had been shared 15,000 times. Within 3 hours, news outlets were quoting it. Within 6 hours, it became a rallying cry for religious trauma survivors across the country. People sharing it with their own stories of churches that valued appearance over truth, leaders who demanded loyalty over accountability, congregations that punished honesty and rewarded performance. The backlash was immediate and vicious from the remaining loyalists. I was called vindictive, bitter, demon-possessed, an agent of Satan trying to destroy God's work. Someone created a counter-petition demanding I issue a public apology and seek spiritual counseling. A few former church members showed up at my apartment building before the police dispersed them for trespassing. My social media filled with threats disguised as prayer. Praying God shows you the error of your ways before it's too late, kind of messages that dripped with implied damnation. I screenshot everything and sent it to Detective Morrison, who filed it in the growing case file. Then I poured a glass of wine and scrolled through the positive messages instead. Survivors thanking me, parents saying my story helped them find courage to leave toxic churches, young people telling me I'd validated their doubts about religious authority. One message from a woman named Sarah broke through my cynicism. "I'm one of the moms who tried to warn your parents about Pastor Joel 3 years ago. Your mom called me a gossip and convinced half the congregation to shun my family. We left the church, and I spent years feeling like I'd failed. Thank you for proving I wasn't crazy. Thank you for protecting the girls I couldn't." I responded to Sarah, to dozens like her, telling them they'd been brave even when no one listened, that they'd done the right thing even when they were punished for it. And slowly, something shifted in my chest. This wasn't just about my family anymore. It had become about every family destroyed by institutions that prized image over integrity. Every victim silenced by spiritual authority. Every person who'd been gaslit into thinking their valid concerns were attacks from the enemy. My father's church was permanently closed now, the building for sale, the congregation scattered to neighboring churches that were being very careful about their vetting processes. My mother was out on bail but facing years in prison if convicted. Pastor Thornton was being held without bail, the evidence against him overwhelming. Veronica had moved back in with my father, both of them reportedly refusing to speak to journalists or acknowledge any wrongdoing. They were planning to plead not guilty, claim they were victims of overzealous prosecution and a vindictive daughter. Let them. The truth doesn't require their confession to remain true. On Sunday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the Christmas dinner that started everything, I woke up to a message from Danny. Thought you'd want to see this? He'd attached a photo of the church building, now stripped of its sign, with a banner hanging across the front. Sold. Future site of Community Youth Center. The new owners had released a statement about their plans, a secular nonprofit providing after-school programs, counseling services, and safe spaces for at-risk teenagers. Everything the church should have been, but wasn't. I smiled and traced the butterfly on my wrist, thinking about transformation and justice and the strange way freedom sometimes looks like destruction. They'd tried to mark me as Satan's daughter for choosing truth over performance. Instead, they'd marked themselves as exactly the kind of leaders Jesus had overturned tables over, profiting from faith while harming the vulnerable, demanding honor while practicing hypocrisy, valuing their authority over the actual well-being of their flock. My phone rang one last time that morning. Margaret, with news that her series had been nominated for a state journalism award and optioned for a documentary. They want to interview you for it. Interested? I thought about my mother in her jail cell, my father in his emptied office, my sister in whatever denial she'd constructed. I thought about the girls who'd been protected by exposure, the families who'd been validated, the pattern that had finally been stopped. And I thought about the congregation member who'd once told me, "Honor your father and mother, no matter what." Tell them yes, I said. Let's make sure everyone learns what honoring truth over authority actually looks like. Margaret laughed. You know they're going to paint you as the villain in some circles, right? Let them, I said, watching the morning sun catch on my butterfly tattoo, making it shimmer like something alive. I'd rather be the villain who told the truth than the hero who kept secrets. 6 months later, I stood in a coffee shop across town from my old apartment, waiting for someone I never expected to hear from again. The documentary had aired 3 weeks ago on a major streaming platform, sparking renewed national conversation about accountability in religious institutions. My mother had taken a plea deal, 8 years for conspiracy to commit child abuse and financial fraud. Her sentencing hearing had been brief and anticlimactic, her lawyer reading a prepared statement about mental health struggles while she stared at the floor. My father sat in the gallery but didn't testify on her behalf. Their marriage had quietly ended via paperwork filed by his attorney 2 months after her arrest. Joel Thornton had been sentenced to 25 years. The trial had been devastating. 4 teenage girls testifying about his manipulation, their parents describing the church's hostile response to their concerns, expert witnesses explaining grooming tactics and institutional cover-ups. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. When the verdict was read, I'd been sitting in the gallery beside Danny and Margaret, watching justice happen in slow motion. Thornton's parents had sobbed in the front row, their son having convinced them until the very end that he was innocent. My mother's journal entries, introduced as evidence, had destroyed that fiction utterly. The coffee shop door opened, and Veronica walked in, looking nothing like the sister I'd known. She'd cut her hair short, dyed it auburn, traded her modest dresses for jeans and a leather jacket. She spotted me and hesitated, her expression cycling through what looked like shame, anger, and resignation before settling on something neutral. I gestured to the seat across from me, and after a long moment, she sat down. "You came," I said. "You asked." She ordered coffee from the barista without looking at me, her hands shaking slightly. "I wasn't sure you would. Ask, I mean. After everything. I wanted to see if you'd show up." I studied her, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way she held herself smaller than before. "You look different. I feel different." She finally met my gaze. I watched the documentary, all of it, including the part where they interview the family's mom and dad destroyed, the teenage girls talking about what Joel did, the parents describing how I personally dismissed their concerns and called them divisive. Her coffee arrived and she wrapped both hands around it like she needed the warmth. I was so convinced we were right, Mel, so sure that anyone questioning our family was attacking God's work. I genuinely believed you were being used by Satan when you got that tattoo. And now? Now I think I was the one being used, just not by who I thought." She laughed bitterly. "Jason's parents paid for me to go to therapy. Actual therapy, not just prayer counseling. They said if I ever wanted to understand what happened, I needed professional help. I thought they were being cruel, but they were probably the kindest people in that whole situation. My therapist has been helping me see how the church, how our parents, weaponized faith to control people, including me." I sipped my coffee, giving her space to continue. "I helped them, Mel. I knew parents were uncomfortable with Joel. I knew the complaints weren't baseless, but I'd been trained my entire life to protect the church's reputation over everything else, to see criticism as spiritual warfare, to value loyalty over truth. So I did what I was taught. I attacked the whistleblowers and defended the predators because that's what good pastors' daughters do." She set down her coffee with a shaky hand. "Those girls were hurt because I chose my parents' approval over their safety. I can't take that back." "No, you can't." "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said quickly. "I know I don't deserve it. I wanted you to know I understand now. What you did, why you did it. You were the only one brave enough to stop performing and start actually caring about truth. And we punished you for it because the truth was terrifying." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, normal people walked past living normal lives, unaware of the wreckage we were sorting through in this generic coffee shop. I thought about the Christmas dinner where this had started, the photo Veronica had sent to hurt me, the family group chat that had exploded my world wide open. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I got accepted to a graduate program in social work, starting this fall." She pulled out her phone and showed me the acceptance email. "I want to work with kids leaving toxic religious environments, help them process the trauma, rebuild their sense of self outside the performance, use my experience to actually help people instead of hurting them." She hesitated. "My therapist says it might be my way of trying to atone. I don't know if it'll work, but it feels like the only path forward that isn't just drowning in guilt." "That's good, Veronica, really." "Is it?" Her eyes were bright with tears. "Or is it just me trying to feel better about being complicit in abuse? How do you tell the difference?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe it's both. Maybe atoning and healing don't have to be separate things." I traced the butterfly on my wrist, a habit now. "For what it's worth, I don't think you were evil. I think you were trained in a system that rewarded the wrong things and punished the right ones. You were a victim too, even while you were harming others. Both things can be true." "That's more grace than I expected from you." "It's not grace. It's just reality." I leaned back in my chair. "I spent months being angry at you, Veronica. Furious at your complicity, your willful blindness, your eagerness to throw me under the bus to maintain your position. But then I realized you were just doing what we were both trained to do. Protect the family image at all costs. I just happened to break the programming first." She wiped her eyes. "Dad won't speak to me anymore. Not since I testified at Mom's sentencing hearing about what I'd witnessed over the years. He said I betrayed the family. How ironic, right?" She almost smiled. "The man who covered up abuse for decades is lecturing me about betrayal. My therapist says that's called projection." She finished her coffee. "He's moved to Arizona, trying to start over. Changed his name, joined a church where nobody knows his history. I heard through mutual friends that he's dating someone new, telling her he's a retired businessman. No mention of being a disgraced pastor married to a convicted felon. Of course he is." I wasn't surprised. Men like my father didn't learn, they just found new audiences for their performance. "And you? Have you found a new church?" "I'm taking a break from organized religion entirely, maybe forever. My therapist says I need to figure out what I actually believe versus what I was programmed to believe." She stood, shouldering her bag. "Thank you for meeting me, Mel. I know you didn't have to." "I wanted to see if people could change," I said honestly. "If facing consequences could actually lead to growth instead of just deeper denial. And I think maybe it can, for some people. if they're willing to do the work. I stood too, facing my sister across the small table. You hurt people, Veronica, including me. You were part of a system that destroyed families and enabled abuse. I can acknowledge your growth without forgiving your actions. Both things are true. I know. She headed for the door, then paused and looked back. That butterfly tattoo. I see why you got it now. It's not about the tattoo itself. It's about choosing your own symbols instead of letting them be chosen for you. After she left, I sat back down and ordered another coffee, processing what had just happened. Veronica was trying to change, genuinely engaging with what she'd been part of, doing the hard work of deconstructing her programming. It didn't erase her complicity, didn't undo the harm she'd caused, didn't earn my forgiveness, but it suggested that maybe exposure and consequences could sometimes lead to actual transformation instead of just better hidden hypocrisy. My phone buzzed with a notification. The documentary had been nominated for an Emmy. Margaret had texted a celebration emoji, along with, "Drinks tonight?" I responded with a yes and scrolled through my messages. Danny had sent photos from Seattle, where he was thriving in his new tech job and dating someone who made him laugh. Sarah, the mother who'd tried to warn my parents years ago, had started a support group for families who'd left toxic churches. She'd asked me to speak at their next meeting. 3 different advocacy organizations had reached out about using my story in their training materials. A publisher wanted to talk about a book. The butterfly on my wrist caught the afternoon light, and I smiled, remembering my mother's horror, my father's disappointment, Veronica's smug superiority when they'd banned me from Christmas dinner. They'd thought they were punishing me for rebellion. Instead, they'd freed me to become the person I'd been suffocating trying not to be, someone who valued truth over performance, integrity over image, actual justice over the appearance of righteousness. My mother was in prison. My father was in Arizona lying to a new woman. My sister was in therapy trying to become someone better than she'd been trained to be. The church was gone, replaced by a community center helping the kind of kids they'd failed to protect. And I was sitting in a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon, my calendar full of advocacy work and speaking engagements, my apartment decorated with things I liked instead of things that matched my family's aesthetic. My life entirely my own for the first time ever. They'd marked me with exile. I'd marked myself with freedom. And of the two, mine was the mark that had actually transformed me. I finished my coffee and headed out into the spring sunshine, my phone already ringing with another journalist wanting an interview. Tomorrow, I'd speak at a conference about institutional accountability. Next week, I'd testify before a state legislative committee about mandatory reporting laws in religious organizations. Next month, I'd start writing the book that would detail everything I'd learned about systems that protect predators and punish truth tellers. But today, I was just a woman with a butterfly tattoo, walking through a city that didn't know my family's name, living a life built on truth instead of performance. And that, I'd learned, was its own kind of victory. Not the dramatic explosion of revelation, but the quiet persistence of actually being free. My family had tried to destroy me over 1 inch of ink. Instead, they'd destroyed themselves while I discovered who I'd always been underneath their expectations. The butterfly had always been there, waiting to emerge. They'd just mistaken the cocoon for my actual form. Their loss, my freedom. And I'd never looked back.